I'm Fred McMurray, and we're back again with Ray Pillar for Pillar's Principles. We've got a very special surprise with Jim Treleaven, aka Dr. Treleaven, aka Dude Who Knows Everybody. Ray, Jim, good to see you both today. I love to get the fact that I get to question both of you.
Yeah, this sounds like fun. I'm looking
You
forward
too,
to
Fred. You're looking forward to it.
Oh yeah,
it.
I always do. So we've been working our way through the questions you should ask before you start a business, and um, now we got Jim on. I want to reel back into a question we earlier asked of are all startups the same, or what are some of the differences in startups? And I'm going to start with Jim because Jim's background is with startups is different than Ray's, and so I'd like to get Jim first, and then Ray, you can give him the pillar treatment,
All right.
prize them. So
Well, as you
Jim,
mentioned, friend, my most of my experience in startups is in technology, primarily software and services,
Mhm.
and the investment required there is um, not a lot of plant and equipment, but people.
Mm.
And in the tech world, that's a challenge actually, because doing a startup where you may not have the capital to bring in some really talented people um, becomes a little bit of a challenge. There are ways to address that. Companies can raise seed capital. They can get people to work, as 1099s in addition to whatever else they're doing. But that's sort of the challenge in the tech world is the intellectual capital that comes with humans. And you can do software startups, and they're famous, obviously, ones, even computer ones, Steve Jobs in the garage and Bill Gates in the basement and whatever. Um, so there's, that's different. And so that's the big question is can you get the intellectual horsepower that you need to actually develop what it is you need to develop? And in the software world, to bring in outside capital, you have to have some level of technology that you can demonstrate. Now, there are obviously exceptions to anything I'm about to have said or I'm about to say, but in general, that's the case. Having some demonstrable product in terms of raising even a friends and family round or an institutional round. We can talk more about what those mean too, if you'd like. Um, so that's the biggest challenge there. In other businesses like Ray, who can speak to it far more knowledgeably than I can, uh, but there's a big investment in, uh, I'll call it, for lack of
It's
a
it's
better
it's
term,
it's
plant and
yeah.
equipment.
Well, it's still people. It's still people, Jim.
Yeah.
Because as a startup, uh, you are an unknown in the community. Okay, and one of the things that really helps us now, being 20 years into the business, is that we are known. We know people know that we treat our employees the right way,
Mm-hmm.
and it was amazing first starting up, interviewing employees. The whole family would come in. Okay, so we're just hiring usually the lady of the household, but um, everyone would come in. She'd bring the kids in. She'd bring her husband in, and just to see that is this the place I want my spouse to work in? You know, so yeah, it's difficult in the beginning for any startup, and I can certainly see from a technical standpoint because I've been on that end in a different job hiring technical people. And I find that amazing too, because people who claimed that they knew everything knew nothing, and people who said, well, maybe I'll be good at this job, and I questioned them, and I think they would be absolutely fantastic. So
I think you made a good point, and that is virtually every business is people. So
yeah, yeah.
obviously in software it's virtually all people, but in every business to some extent it's people. Very good point.
All right. So as we tie this into the next question, which is what resources do I need or what resources do I already have? Most people aren't going to have a pocket full, I'll keep it clean, a pocket full of people in their back end, in their back pocket. Um, so besides people, what other resources do I need? And how can I find the resources? If I don't have them, how can I find them? So who wants to
Well,
jump in first?
I'll start it off because I think what I realized when I started my business was that I had more resources than I initially thought. Because once you start thinking about it, you have a lot available to you. And if you don't go after some of those resources, then you well, you just don't go after them, and you just don't start the business. But there are other, if you really think hard and start talking to people, such just people like Jim, you will find resources that you would never dreamed of. You want to take it from there, Jim?
I'm sure it's and it's to your point, Ray, it's at some level at that stage, once you think about the people issue, you're going to need some level of capital.
Right.
And that generally comes in stages for most small companies. And again, like we said in the beginning, all startups are different, but most founders in many cases have some amount of capital put in. And then there's friends and family, and which is a little tricky, but in any case, and then there's angel investors and sort of non-institutional sources, and then there's institutional sources that ranges everything from SBA to venture capital in terms of startups.
That's
and
right.
The appetite for those kinds of firms varies. Many of them specialize in different industries and different businesses. And so putting together a plan in terms of which actually everybody that I mentioned should look for, not all of them will, but is, what amount of capital is necessary to get the business past, in most cases, a sort of cash flow break-even hurdle. And then the business can be more self-sustaining.
So I want to unpack this stuff because you both have said a mouthful. With respect to Ray and Jim, you actually mentioned SBA loans and on the Pillars of Franchising show, we've talked about that often. And for a franchise purchase, we always came up with 2.5 times the franchise fee. So a franchise system charges you a fee, and based on Ray's and other folks' knowledge, we came up with 2.5 times that, and that's what will get you ultimately past. That's what will ultimately get you past the.
Let me qualify that just a little bit, because I said 2.5 times of what the franchise says you would need.
Okay.
Okay. So not what their fee is, because that's usually
Fair enough. Fair enough. Because
if they say, well, you should have 500,000 in the bank, you better have a little bit more than that, because pandemics hit and things happen and you need to get past that point. So if you're up to your last dollar and you have to lose the business for $1, that is not wise.
Yep.
So where my point was going with this is with a franchise that's very well established because you check their FDDs, the fees that you're going to need, so on and so forth. There's a multiplier there. Okay. With the type of startup that Jim's talking about, the tech startup, how do you figure out what that dollar amount is you need to go out to get funding? Because SBA is not going to, from what I've always understood, SBA is not going to give you a loan for a startup if you can't show some type of reasonable revenue flow off that. Whereas a franchise, they have their plan, we'll say, of how much you should be able to make when.
Well, you make a good point because the SBA is not generally involved in early stage investing in tech startups for pretty much that exact reason. But to answer your the opening question is what I think is most useful for startups, and they don't all think about it this way, is run out the expected cash flow for, let's just say for sake of argument, 3 years out on a monthly basis. And then you do the cumulative cash flow at the bottom. And once that hits a plus sign, in theory, that's the amount you need. Now, I think you mentioned earlier, Ray, too, that that's not the right answer. You're going to need that plus some amount because things are never going to work out exactly as you plan. But, if you come up with that number and then depending on the riskiness of the business or the uncertainty of cash flows, add 10 or 20%. And then that's going to be a really good measure of the amount of capital that you'll need to get to cash flow positive.
Okay.
Always more than you initially be.
Always.
Right.
Always.
So
I'm sure there are exceptions, but
yeah.
I want to go back and hit one other point that I thought a comment made that was really important. And you said for tech companies, they need to have something demonstratable. So if somebody can say in their presentation, this is what we've got, you can see it, that's see it, feel it, hear it, touch it, whatever. For tech startups, that's an incredibly important thing to have. So it's not just got this idea for a widget that I came up with when I was walking along and a coconut hit me on the head. That ain't going to cut it. You need to actually have it to the point where they can see it working, where that's not true in a franchise because a franchise is considered an existing franchise system. But so, Ray, on your side, how does this affect the stage one or the, what do they call them, emerging franchises? Is an emerging franchise harder to get funded?
Oh, I would, definitely. Yeah. It's an unknown. And the reason you go into a franchise is because of the knowns.
I get that, but then how do new little franchisees become? But we won't go there. All right. So what we're going to do?
It's a whole new topic.
We're not going to go there. So I'm going to give each of you the chance to any final pillar principle comment you want to make. Jim, since you're our guest, go for it.
Okay. What I'd like to sort of close with is, since we're talking about startups, is startups are the lifeblood of the economy. I can't say enough about how important they are in many ways. One is in terms of building new businesses, but the other is in terms of innovation. Look at where a lot of the innovation has come from. And, and I mentioned Apple and Microsoft and so forth, but why are you smiling? But that's where the innovation in the economy comes from generally. And I could talk about innovation for the next 3 hours, but
different show. We'll do a different show on innovation.
I go. But in any case, I just want to put in a plug for startups as such an important part of the economy. And there are startups within bigger companies too. So it's not just separate corporate entities, but some bigger companies are better at it than others as well. But that's what keeps the engine going.
Yep. And that's sort of the definition of an entrepreneur. He's the one going out there and taking the chance and putting up the money behind it all. And he has the dream and he has the he looks towards the end result of what he's trying to do.
Yeah, and, without talking about the value of different economic systems, free markets are a wonderful thing.
Absolutely.
And I don't see how me saying much more can get this episode any better than it is. Awesome insights for anybody who's thinking about starting a business, launching a business. I'll send them your way, both of your way. Thanks, gentlemen. We'll be back again next week with another episode of Pillar's Principles with Ray Pillar. And thanks, Jim Treleaven.